All right, guys, quiz time. See how we do. Let's see if we can relate the story to our knowledge of DNA. So we said DNA provides the directions on how to build our body's proteins. And remember, our proteins are what's going to give us our traits. So let's start out with, in my story, what was the DNA? What were the directions? If you said that the directions were the recipe that my friend stole from the HoHo factory, you would be correct. Remember, the directions for how to build the proteins, here we're looking at the recipe for how to build the HoHos. So in other words, what are the proteins in my story? If you said the proteins were the HoHos, again, you'd be correct. All right, next question, guys. We said that DNA cannot leave the nucleus. Remember, the recipe in my story could not leave the vault of the HoHo factory. After all, if it did leave the vault, we would be busted and Hostess wouldn't know how to make their famous HoHos. So that recipe could not leave the vault, just like DNA cannot leave the nucleus. So we said, how does the DNA or those instructions get out? Because what we know, the ribosomes make proteins and the ribosomes are outside the nucleus. So we need to get those directions out of the nucleus. So in my story, how did we get the directions or the recipe out of the vault without taking the recipe directly? That's right. My friend took the Post-it note and she shorthanded the recipe and brought it back to us, where we then took it to my kitchen to make the HoHos. Now, what is that process called when a cell copies its DNA, the part of the DNA that it needs, into a shorthanded copy, which would be RNA? What is that process called when DNA is copied into RNA? That's right, it's called transcription. Remember that word scribe, it means to write. So my friend had to go into the vault and she had to write down that shorthanded recipe. One thing I want to point out, did my friend write every single recipe down that was in the vault? Did she write the recipe down for how to make HoHos and how to make ding dongs and all the other Hostess products? No, and neither would your cells. It depends on what they needed to make at that time. My friend was only interested in getting that HoHo recipe, so she only copied down the section of the directions that she needed. All right, so again, that's called transcription. Now, once she transcribed the recipe, she was then able to leave the vault and go take those directions to somewhere where we could make the HoHos. So we took that recipe and we took it back to my house and we started to make our HoHos. In a cell, the RNA is taken to the ribosomes, right? So what is that process called of when we take that RNA to the ribosomes to turn the RNA into an actual protein? You're right, that's called translation. So the process of us taking that recipe to the kitchen to turn the directions of recipe into something completely different, we actually made the HoHos. That was the translation process. In a cell, that's taking the RNA, it leaves the nucleus, it goes out into the ribosome, and it's going to help make the protein.